This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Well, like any superhero, there is an origin story, and that's what you're going to hear today. And then we're going to get into prospective policies and vision and mission. With us is Dave Bronson here on the Tom Anderson Show. He is the front runner. He won the municipal election outright, but not really, because there is that pesky got to have 45% plus one. And so he goes into a runoff against Forrest Dunbar. If there's ever been a demarcation or a very opposite spectrum candidate challenge, it's this one, very left versus very right. Bronson has a story, and he's agreed to come on and talk about his background, military and professionally, and then what his plan is for the future. So, Dave Bronson, such an honor to have you with us. Good morning.
Tom, good morning to you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, your origin story, like Superman and like Batman and everybody, you were your kid. Somebody watches movies, I'm sure. Let's talk about your origin story. Where are you from? And tell me about your military career, and thank you for your service, and then how you zoomed into professional flying. And you know I'm a huge fan of pilots, never have been one, never will be, but I get goosebumps from you guys, and I appreciate all you do. How did you get started?
Well, first, your analogy, your superhero analogy, trust me, in my case, is not a good analogy. I'm just a working class, working stiff kind of guy, and I'm just here to fix problems. But it's the origin. Real straightforward, real simple. I grew up in northern Wisconsin. I've always had a job. Left college. Excuse me. Graduated from college and went into the Air Force. Did 9 years of active duty. I flew mostly B-1s there, which is a large bomber, and then got into the airlines. And the airlines brought me to Alaska in 91, and I've been here ever since. I was supposed to come up for only 2 years, and obviously I'm now on year 31 of my 2-year commitment. So I guess I don't do public math very well.
Wow, I love it. I love it. And you know, we have Mike Schauer on, FedEx pilot. We have Kevin McCabe on, both fans of yours. I know McCabe is an Atlas 747 pilot. And you, what made you decide? I've never asked this question to you. You've been on the show before, but you could fly passengers or cargo. And my hunch is you've done both. How did you end up in the cargo and foreign realm? That's kind of cool to be a global pilot.
Well, when I came up here in 91, I came up with Northwest Airlines, which had a cargo division up here, which was flying the 747-200. I think we had about 20 or 21 of them. But at Northwest, it doesn't matter what's going on in the back. So when I would get to Narita or Amsterdam or Minneapolis or New York, I could transfer. I could be a cargo pilot or I could be a passenger pilot. It really didn't matter. It was all international. So I've been flying international for 30 years, and then here several years ago, there was a merger between Delta and Northwest. Eventually, the freighter division went away, and I've been a passenger pilot with Delta Airlines out of Seattle since 13 years ago, something like that.
Wow. My uncle Dixon Anderson, my dad's brother. Funny, my dad has two brothers, Dick and Harry. Not kidding, Tom, Dick and Harry. They're Minnesotans, so we're right next to you in Wisconsin. Dick sadly passed away a couple of years ago. We think from Agent Orange. He was in Vietnam, helicopter pilot, but he segued in and transitioned into, and by the way, he was on the Oriskany and one of the few surviving pilots of that aircraft carrier disaster in Vietnam, but he was a Northwest Airlines pilot as well for 25 years. So that's near and dear to my heart. That's awesome that you flew with Northwest. I did not know that. So Dave Bronson, fast forward, you see a problem. Houston, we have a problem, only it's in Anchorage. and you decide to run for office, people say, hey, I know some of the background where neighbors and friends said you would do a good job, you're retired, you have the time, you have the skill sets. What ultimately pushed you into jumping into this when you have admitted you can be a statesman, but you're not a politician in the sense of you like the argumentative nature of it and the hostility. You want to get the job done like a manager, like a pilot, flying, safely landing. What made you ultimately decide to jump into the race?
Well, we had some conversations with several people that asked me to consider, and it was a several-week process to decide to get in, and then I just did. The reason being is that I saw what was going on in the city and how broken the city was, and it just came to a point to me, because I had the good life. I was almost retired. I hadn't flown since March, and basically the airline kept us on at full pay as we were waiting a resolution on the COVID procedures. And by the time it got to summertime, it looked like it was going to be a lot longer than we thought it was. We thought it was going to be maybe a few weeks or a month. And so I was retired well, doing everything I worked for all my life, which was hunting, fishing, and flying and traveling with my wife. But it was not appealing anymore because I saw what was going on in the city and how broken it was. Basically, we had a lot of leftist politicians ruining our city, and I just wasn't going to be happy until I was part of the solution. And so this mayor's thing came into consideration, and then I pulled the trigger in the summer.
Well, let's get into, and you have supporters, folks that a lot of people respect, from Bernadette to Craig Campbell, from Laura Lehman, Art Hackney, longtime friend, been in the business. You've worked with him consulting, and he's all his life lived here. Dad, I think, was a lawmaker up in Fairbanks. You've got some old school Alaskans supporting you, and now it's really growing with Robin's endorsement, and already you won fair and square sizably. So rather than get into support, which I often do in these interviews, who is supporting you, who's endorsing, let's get into first the steps you'll take as a mayor. Are you doing anything now? What's your plan in the future when you get in? What's the next step? And I know you can't get into too much detail because you got to get in the seat and look at the budgets, but you can generally macro talk about it.
Well, to be prudent, we have to start looking at transition, which is a very significant when you're changing the direction this much that we intend on doing. If I win, I do have to devote some energy from campaigning to working on transition. So what I did is I brought on, like you said, Craig Campbell and Larry Baker. They're chairing the transition process, and I have regular meetings with them on the. It's very complex. There's multiple committees, and like economic and development and tourism development, that's a separate committee that's going to deal with that, and that's chaired by Meade Treadwell and my former opponent of mine, a friend of mine, Mike Robbins. And we'll have many committees, up to 10 of them on different subject matters, and then we'll bring in the subject matter experts to populate those committees, and then they will recommend process and policies and procedures in going forward.
And by the way, Laura Lehman, former state representative, state senator, lieutenant governor. Craig Campbell, retired general from the Guard. He has run so many different groups, yep. Quasi-government groups. Of course, Larry Baker, former CEO, owner of pretty much all the Burger Kings in the state, friend of mine, also state representative, assembly member, assembly chair. He has done it all. And then Mike Robbins, opponent, and you guys got along for the most part on the campaign trail, and you beat him fair and square. And he stepped up within days and said, I want to help. And so that's cohesiveness, and that's bringing everybody together. One thing I didn't like was I'll just say disingenuousness of the other side. I had Bill Falsey on the show, and I had George Martinez on the show, and I said, you guys are both liberals, but you're in there, and if you get in, are you basing everything on the person, not on politics? And they're like, no, on the person, on the agenda. And then they both jumped right up to support very socialistic leaning Forrest Dunbar. And I thought, you guys are full of, you're not looking at it fair and square. And I'm not picking on them, but I thought they would have been open-minded and stayed out of the race or went for you. And nope, they defaulted like all the Democrats do to Dunbar. So another question I have for Mr. David Bronson is relationships. And I mean relationships when it comes to, you got a transition team that's formed and you got some solid people. You probably have a list of 100 people that are going to help. You don't have enough time to go through it all. Women, men, old, young, veterans. I bet you'll even talk to homeless shelters and folks and the whole thing. That's huge. But second question is tied to relationships. How is your relationship with local, let's say, trade association or state lawmakers, mayors? Have you talked to a mayor, let's say, Kenai Peninsula or the Mat-Su? What about federal delegation? My guess is you have a solid, cohesive one with all of the above, but I'd like to hear, and I know the voters want to hear, what's your connection with them?
Well, yeah, I know. I've known Edna in Palmer for Mayor Palmer, and her and Noel for many years. I consider them friends. We've never really sat and talked in-depth policy. It's kind of premature, I think, to do that, but we're very much in agreement on the approach to many of our problems that we're facing, and they're facing many of the same problems out there. Charlie Pierce, I know him. In fact, we went out and spent a couple days at their house here last month, and I just wanted to kind of get a handle on how he deals with problems, how he handled the COVID response. It turns out how he handled it would have been, quite frankly, just how I would have handled it here in the city.
And where's Mayor Pierce? Because some people may not know who he is. I do, but where is he representing?
He's the Kenai Borough mayor.
Yep.
He's got about 65,000, 70,000 people on the peninsula that he accounts to.
So now let's break it up.
Great guy.
Yep.
I think he's got a great future in state politics. I really admire him a great deal.
And so, Dave, I'm going to now bifurcate or split. Forrest Dunbar, you can't speak for him, but you have a sense of his connectivity or lack thereof. Forrest Dunbar dealing with Don Young, who he ran against, dealing with Dan Sullivan, your friend, dealing with Lisa Murkowski, dealing with Mayor Mike Dunleavy, dealing with the Senate majority led by the Republicans, dealing with the CHAR, the Hospitality Retailers Association, dealing with the Home Builders Association. Now, Dave Bronson, Mayor Dave Bronson, dealing with the aforementioned. Who has a better connection and relationship with those?
Well, quite frankly, ideologically, I'm very much aligned with most of what you are saying. Forrest Dunbar, you mentioned CHAR. Not that they've endorsed me, but I'm trying to get them back into business, and he's the guy who for a year has been shutting them down.
Home builders?
Yeah, he would find it difficult, I think, to partner with our congressional delegations, certainly Don Young, because not so much based on personalities, but based on a different ideology. We have to remember Mr. Dunbar, a very smart young man.
Sure.
I'm not here to underestimate him. He's I believe, a Yale-trained lawyer, very smart young man, but he uses all that intellect to take our city in the wrong direction. That's what's kind of scary. But his worldview is completely different than, say, Don Young's or Senator Sullivan's. He's on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's, quite frankly, an AOC type leftist, and I don't even want to call him a Democrat. I've got a lot of Democrats, to be honest with you, supporting me, and what they say is we don't recognize where our party has been taken. You know, traditionally, it's always been a debate in the city politically between mayoral candidates. So one is center right, and one is center left, and they argue about issues in the middle. But it's pretty cordial. You know, if I look back in time, I think Tony Knowles was actually a pretty good mayor.
Project 80s for sure. And you mentioned
now sure. I don't think I've changed. And you said early on in the intro, you said I'm an extreme right kind of conservative guy. I'm not. I'm very conservative in my personal views, but from governance, my role is to govern from where I think is best for the city, and that's the center right of the political spectrum. We don't need big swings in political ideology at City Hall. We need to stay, and I think the best place is center right, and that's best for the body politic. It produces the best policies going forward, because we've got a lot of problems that we have to solve, and quite frankly, we have to solve them together. But the conservative like me, or the center right guys always ask, how are you going to reach across the island and work with a very liberal or a very radical assembly? A few of the members are kind of radical there, Forrest Dunbar being one of them. And it's funny, I never hear anyone ask them, how are you going to reach across the aisle and deal with a mayor that might be more conservative, stridently more conservative than you, or other assembly members, say Crystal Kennedy or Jamie Allard.
Totally.
They don't work with them, and they're never asked, how are you going to work with them?
And that's why I brought up Forrest, Dave. We're talking about Dave Bronson, mayoral candidate, front runner in Anchorage, and many hope will become the next mayor of Anchorage. And that's why I brought up the home builders who endorsed you, the CHAR, and whether it's Anchorage CHAR or Sylvia Villamides or all the different groups, the Trina Johnsons, the Frank Dahl, I know, who endorsed Mike Robbins, already wrote to me and said, I want to write an op-ed for APE to support resoundingly Dave Bronson. And you go down the line, you're going to, that's why I asked the question, it was planned that you're going to be able to work with them. You're going to be able to work with Governor Dunleavy and the legislature, left and right. I think you're a nice person. Nobody would say otherwise. And so as we move forward, another biggie, and we'll run out of time here and we'll get you back in the future. And of course, Forrest Dunbar's always welcome to come. We'll interview him and make a YouTube video of him too. He's never come on the show with me, but he's welcome to during the mayoral race, always, of course. And Dave would love to hear his thoughts too on my show, I'm sure. But that said, how about law enforcement? We'll wrap it up with that. Are you going to be working with APD and, not necessarily restructuring, but you'll have the ability to choose chief? Are you going to be working with state troopers and the commissioner, other law enforcement, Kenai, Palmer, Wasilla, the feds? There's lots of, there's not just FBI. There's, railroad security, port security, all sorts. Is that on the agenda in the beginning when you take office as well?
Almost certainly. In days like this, the politicians need to give support to our police departments. Our police departments are, quite frankly, under attack. It seems like in the big cities nationwide that defund the police. A notion that Forrest Dunbar supports, and we have organizations, I think, domestic terror organizations like Antifa that have to be dealt with as domestic terrorist organizations. And the police, they need to understand that we have their back, and we do. Certainly, we're going to work with the chief that I select. We'll work with all of those organizations. And those things are already in place. It's not like we need to reinvent the wheel here. What we need is a change in ideology at City Hall, one that supports our police officers and supports the laws that we have in place. No one is above the law. It doesn't matter if you're rich or if you're poor living on the streets. Everyone has to follow the law, and that's what the police. Individual police officers want. That's what I want, and that's an ideology that I'll support.
Yeah, and I would ask you about immigration, but that won't affect your purview. But, man, it's the same mentality, and I know you agree on our borders, and to be fair and comply with the law, and typically everything works out well. When you don't, you have Minneapolis and Portland and riots and everything else, and I foresee that you're going to have a cleaner, as you and Robin say, prosperous and thriving city with your agenda. Dave, I look forward to getting you on again before the actual day. Real quick, what are the dates? May 3rd, they mail out the ballots, and May 11th, you got to turn it in by postmarket?
No. We believe we were just notified the day before yesterday.
Okay.
It really changed our game. The ballots will probably be in the mail either today or tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
So, by Friday, Saturday, you should be getting them. So we've got to up our game and communicate to the people that when you get your ballot, there's going to just be two bubbles. It's going to be me to fill in, me or Forrest Dunbar. fill them in and mail it in as quick, or actually drop it in the drop boxes around town.
And get them in.
Do not wait till the last minute.
Dave Bronson for mayor. He's the right choice in my opinion, and I'm crossing my fingers and say a prayer, but guess what? Like you just said, the real thing is vote. So thank you, Dave Bronson. We'll get you back before the election. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You betcha. Well, man, your vote matters, that's for sure. Folks, enjoy your day. Tom Anderson Show.